Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Hey gang, sorry if I'm sounding a little nasally right now. My allergies are killing me, and I just had an updated allergy test last week, so that was a total bunch of fun. But hopefully we're getting on the mend, and I won't be so nasally moving forward. So, having said that, thanks for sticking with me. Thanks for everyone who's submitting stories. Please continue to do so. Leave us not be hasty. Sit back, relax, and enjoy some true scary stories from your old Uncle Josh. Strange Encounter in the Appalachian Mountains in Appalachia, Georgia, by Patient Economics 980. This happened about a year ago when I had recently picked up hunting from a good friend of mine. My father had bought a cabin very secluded in the woods about an hour from any town. It was on about 15 acres with 2 cabins and was located down a long gravel road off another long rural road, so very secluded and quiet. Anyway, me being 20 years old at the time, I wanted to be in the woods a lot since we had always lived in cities and whatnot. My friend that I mentioned before about getting me into hunting came up to visit me and helped me get set up for deer season. He got to my house and we hung out for the day and relaxed for a bit. The next day we got up pretty early and went out to Walmart to get some supplies. We bought a 2-man deer blind, some corn feed, some trail cams, and some ammo. We got back to the house around 7 a.m. or so and packed up our bags to get ready to set up the spot. As I mentioned previously, my dad lives on about 15 acres in the Appalachian Mountains that quite literally borders the national forest. We hiked up the ridge for what felt like 3 miles until we made it to the peak, and my friend said that this would be a good spot to put the blind because we could see down both sides of the ridge and see the top pretty clearly. We got everything set up and put the corn out and finished it all by 10:30 a.m. We both agreed that we'd go back down to the house to grab some food and maybe go to town for a few hours. Not even 5 minutes of us walking back down the mountain, we heard what sounded like a huge tree branch fall from like 50 feet. We both stopped and looked behind us to see if we could see anything because it sounded like it was maybe 30 yards behind us, back where we had just been setting up. We stayed there for about a minute before my buddy cracked a joke about a pretty hefty squirrel taking a tumble. Fast forward about a month when deer season was just getting started. I'd gone back to my dad's house for opening day, and he was on a business trip in Dallas, and my buddy was in Florida visiting his grandparents. So it was just me, which I was totally fine with because I mostly like to be alone. My plan was to get up by 6 a.m. since the sun doesn't come up until around 7:30 or 7:45, and that would give me enough time to get up the ridge and get situated. Anyway, I got suited up and threw on my bag and grabbed my Henry 30-30 lever-action rifle. Dad wanted me to kill the first deer on the property with his cowboy gun. I got up on the ridge at around 6:45, so still another hour left of darkness. The forest was dead quiet. I noticed that when I first walked into the woods. It wasn't the usual crickets and insects chirping. It almost felt like I was in a soundproof box, and the crunching of the leaves and sticks that I was stepping on were like gunshots. I didn't think too much of it because it was early morning and not midnight, so I thought that was just normal up there. About another 10 minutes went by as I was in my blind, and I heard what literally sounded like a full-grown bear howling or screaming in pain like it had just lost a limb. My heart dropped instantly, and I held my breath to be as quiet as possible. I'm not stupid or believe in anything paranormal or cryptid. Let's get that straight right here. So my initial thought was, bear. I didn't hear any walking or noises for another 2 minutes of it being quiet, so it kind of slipped my mind and I went back to waiting around. Probably 15 or 20 minutes before sunrise, I heard something big, think buck-sized, walking around maybe 60 yards behind me. Adrenaline hit because I thought I was about to get a good one on opening day, and I tried to turn around as quietly as possible to get eyes on this bad boy. As soon as I got about 120 degrees around, I saw something standing up on its hind legs in the corner of my eye. I paused and tried to be still, but I was curious as to what the fuck I thought I was seeing, immediately thinking I was going to have to shoot an agitated black bear. So I decided I was really going to get ready to shoot this thing if I had to. So I completed the full turn while moving my barrel up. And I swear, as soon as I laid eyes on that fucking monster, it screamed just like I had heard earlier on. And every fucking hair and pore on my body stood up, and I was frozen in fear trying to make out what I was looking at, with what little light there was. This fucking thing got done with that scream after what felt like an eternity and turned around and literally jumped or ran down the hill. Yeah, jump ran. I don't know how to explain it, but every step was like me jumping 5 feet forward. It was humanly impossible to have a lunge that long. And no, before you ask, it did not run away on 4 legs. This motherfucker was sprinting on 2 legs like a fucking man. I sat in that blind for the next 3 hours, frozen, trying to muster up the courage to get out of the blind and make the hike back down to the house. Eventually, I did make it back down to the cabin, and of course nothing happened to me. I called my dad as soon as I got down there to tell him what the fuck I had just witnessed, and to this day, he still doesn't believe me. I haven't gone up on that ridge to this day either, and I refuse to go up there to get the blind and the cameras. I was looking on Apple Maps, and about 5 miles to the east is an Indian memorial and burial ground. Not sure if you guys know anything about these things or about the Appalachian Mountains or had any similar experiences. Today, I try to tell myself that it was just a big-ass bear with rabies or maybe some other sort of infection or disease. The Scariest Thing That Ever Happened to Me by King Mac 24. I got a good one for you guys. This story fucked me up. I was about 10 or 11 when it happened. My mom and my brothers and I lived in a tribal housing house, Rabbit Ridge, located in Kennesaw, Wisconsin. They all went to my grams for one evening and asked if I wanted to go, but I wanted to stay home, so I'd just be by myself. I ended up hearing this tapping noise for like 5 minutes and couldn't figure out where it was coming from after everyone had left. My mom had this drum set in the corner of our living room, and I specifically remember watching American Dad at the time, and I turned it down and determined if it was coming from the drum set or not. I even went over and checked to see if maybe a mouse or something like that got stuck in one of the drums. But I ended up seeing the top of one of the drums ripple after I heard the tapping noise, but I didn't see anything inside the drum. I got scared, but I also got more intrigued. I saw and heard the drum hit again, so I hit it myself, a little harder, and the thing, whatever was making the noise, hit the drum back just as hard. I did this like 5 more times, and every time it responded. I was going to continue doing it, but deep down it started to really freak me out. So I did it one more time and then got no response. I did it one more time after that, and still didn't get a response. But all of a sudden, from the back of our hallway, I heard something sprinting down the hallway right at me. All I thought to do was cover up and plug my ears. But then I uncovered them. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. But I could feel something evil watching me. I remember sweating so bad I could feel what felt like each droplet on my head and back. I called my grandpa, panicked, and had him come and get me. Anyhow, some 20 years later, 6 months ago, my uncle called me and was really freaked out. He said he had this horrible dream where he was back at the old house in Rabbit Ridge at night. He said he could hear his mom, my grandma, screaming from inside the house. He said he went in and my grandma went running out and said there was something in the back room. He said he went to go see what it was. And then he told me the house was set up the same as it had been when we were kids, when I was living there. He said he saw this man sitting on the bed looking back at him with this inhumanly big smile. My uncle asked him who he was, and he said, "Don't you remember me?" My uncle said, "No, who are you?" And he said, "I'm the man that was fucking with your nephew all them years ago on the drum set." My uncle said his heart dropped and he got super freaked out. And then the man jumped out the window. Now, I don't know what to think, but I do believe those two things were connected. My uncle did make a picture of what the guy or thing looked like. And I find it super odd that 20 years had to pass, and we have families on our own now. But the story and memory still sends chills down my spine. There's a Mimic Haunting Me by Cause Emotional, and be sure to check out her channel, Amber After Dark. The story I'm about to tell you is 100% true, and it happened to me about a year ago. At the time, I lived in a basement apartment with my fiancé, a male 25. I'll refer to him as Frank. At first, the apartment was everything we wanted, but over time, the energy shifted. What was once a positive vibe turned into a heavy, depressing, and honestly, very negative energy. I haven't thought about this incident in a while since it happened so long ago, and to be honest, I don't like thinking about it or talking about it. I'm a firm believer the more you talk about it, the more it manifests into your reality. But it's come to the point where it's too hard to ignore. One night, my fiancé and I were working late. We're both content creators, so our evenings usually consist of writing scripts, editing our videos, and occasionally we have time for a show or a movie. However, this night was one of those late nights where we were both grinding. Frank is a gamer. When he'd play his games, I could hear him in his office. He has a car simulator, and when he shifts gears, I can hear it easily from my office. That night I was very focused, and Frank opened my door slightly. I saw him from the corner of my eye, his silhouette, his hat, and everything. However, I did not want to be interrupted or bothered because I was on a roll. So automatically I said, "Leave me alone, not now." I'll admit it was a bit snappy, but we have this rule where we don't knock, talk, or chat until a certain time, and it wasn't that time yet. I was not in the mood, but I felt bad, so I called his name immediately after he walked away. But here's the thing. 2 seconds later, I heard Frank shifting gear in his car simulator and yelling, "Fuck!" That's when my heart dropped to the pit of my stomach, and my eyes widened because there was no way that he was just at my door. It takes time to set up his entire self in his car simulator, and there was no way in that short amount of time he went from my room to his office. I continued to call his name so he would come to my office, but it took like 3 or 4 times before he heard me through his headphones. He came into the room with a confused look on his face, wondering why I was calling. Immediately, I asked him what he wanted earlier when he came to my room. He looked at me puzzled, and he had no idea what I was talking about. So I asked if he had knocked on my door, opened my door, and came into my room all within the last 5 minutes. He said no, and I frantically explained everything to him and what I had just experienced. He was creeped out, but not as much as me, clearly, because that night he slept like a baby. However, I did not. It didn't stop there, though. There was more than one incident that took place that night, and even later that week. I'll tell those stories another time if anyone's interested. But this story explains why I think it's back. My fiancé and I moved somewhere else because the basement apartment was just too depressing, and honestly, we needed more space. We now have 2 floors, and this is great because I don't hear Frank shifting gears anymore, and I can film and edit without hearing him film his content. The space is nice, and plus we have room for our 2 beautiful little kittens. My office is upstairs where the entrance, living room, kitchen, and bathrooms are, and Frank's office is downstairs along with our bedroom. It's a beautiful apartment with high ceilings, and at first it reminded me of Gilmore Girls. In my office in particular, there are 3 huge windows. During the day it's beautiful, but at night it's kind of fucking creepy. At first, I loved coming into my office at nighttime because naturally I'm a night owl. But now I hate it. My 2 8-month-old kittens don't even like coming into my office at all, not even during the day. And at first I didn't think it was bad energy, but my mind is shifting fast. Both Frank and I have seen the Phantom Cat. At least that's what we named it, and at first I thought it was the spirit of his doggo that recently passed away, but now I'm not convinced. I consider myself very in tune with energy, and I've always been a very spiritual person since I was a child. I pick up on things quickly. Well, my cats looked into my office and stood at the door. Not lately, but in the past their tails have gotten poofy. They won't even stay upstairs at night, and in fact our bedroom door will be open, and they choose to stay in the bedroom. We tried introducing them to wandering around and running upstairs at nighttime after Frank and I went to bed. But one time we did that, and they came running into our bedroom freaked out. And ever since, they refused to go back upstairs alone at nighttime. The other day, I saw someone standing at our front door. I was filming for my YouTube channel, and it looked like Frank, so I didn't acknowledge him because I know he has a key and he could very visibly see me filming from the window. I thought he was dropping off one load of groceries at the front door and then going back to the car to grab the rest. He was taking so long, I called him to ask why. When he answered the phone, I could clearly hear the background noise of a public setting, and he said that he was just checking out at the cash register. Another thing is that I think it's trying to possess me, or it's draining the crap out of me. I feel so drained all the time, and lately my anxiety is through the roof. I'm also having problems with my health. And I'm actually going to head out after posting this because I've been on my period for 3+ weeks. At first, I thought this thing was a mimic. And then I thought it was gone. But now I think it's something much more evil. It's not attached to the house, I get that. It's probably Frank or I, but I don't know. I don't know how to get rid of it. So if you have any advice, please, don't be shy. Weird occurrences keep happening at the house across from mine, by Mina's Sweet Girl. A little backstory, real quick, on this house. We moved into the neighborhood in 2019, so we've been here for a few years and have seen a few things with our neighbor's house. A month after moving in, there was a bunch of cop cars in front of the house and a forensics team. They were there for hours, not sure how long because I ended up falling asleep. Clearly somebody died. But we never found out how. Whether it was a murder or from old age, we don't know. We never saw anything in the newspaper either. Anyway, a few months later, a new family moved in, and everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. At one point, I remember looking out the window, and I saw a man put a woman wrapped in sheets in the back of his car. And then he left. I remember asking my husband if I should call the cops, and he said no. Maybe they were just going to the hospital. The next day, cops showed up at the house, and they brought the man out. It looked like they were questioning him, and then they left. I will say that we had never seen that woman before, and we haven't seen her since. It was just really weird. After that, things kind of calmed down, and my husband texted me that the cops were about to show up at the house in front of ours again. He was working at the police department at the time and saw the police dispatch. Apparently, the man in the house was getting a divorce from his wife. Now his wife, we've seen multiple times, not the other lady. Anyway, there was a restraining order set in place and he'd shown up at the house. It seemed like a very messy divorce, and we would witness the cops showing up a few more times, until those people moved out and the house went up for sale. The house ended up sitting vacant for over a year, and there have been some contractors come by and do some things to the house. They fixed the roof and the siding. They put new windows in, etc. The previous neighbors had been renters, so I guess there was some damage done. But then, one day, the for sale sign went down, and the house is still sitting vacant at this point. But every once in a while, a white unmarked van comes by and then leaves. It's extremely loud, so we know when it shows up and takes off. This went on for weeks. It would come by for 30 minutes to an hour and then leave. And recently, the van has been staying there parked overnight. I've seen somebody come out of the van multiple times and go into the house, sometimes with a bag of fast food or just a white shopping bag. And while all of that sounds normal, maybe I've got a new neighbor. The thing is, we've never seen a moving van or anybody moving furniture in, and the house still looks vacant. The windows even still have the new installation stickers on them, so something extremely weird is going on with that house. I've joked with my husband that it must be some sort of meth lab, and that I hope it doesn't catch on fire or explode. But now I think, what if something is more sinister over there? What if the house has bad energy all around and attracts suspicious people? I don't know, man. That van is only there at night. I've never seen it during the day. I try not to spy on the neighbor, and I try to mind my own business, but I can't help notice the sketchy behavior. Anyway, I stay on my side of the sidewalk, and I don't go near that house. It gives me the creeps. Terrifying Uber experience, submitted by Gino. Back in 2013, when Uber was the brand new thing that nobody really understood yet, I thought I'd struck absolute gold by signing up as a driver. This was in Metro Detroit. I'll call myself Gene for this story. At the time, I was just a regular guy trying to make some extra cash to pay off a mountain of school debt. So the idea of using my own beat-up sedan to cruise around and get paid for it sounded like the easiest gig in the world. Back then, the company was throwing crazy incentives at us because they were desperate for drivers, and the whole system felt like the Wild West, where you just turned on an app and suddenly strangers were jumping into your car. Anybody who was a driver back then knows exactly what I'm talking about. I remember it was a Friday night and pretty cold in late November when I got a ping around 2 a.m, right as the bars were letting out and the streets were flooding with people looking for rides. I pulled up to a curb outside a crowded dive bar on the edge of the city and feeling pretty good about bagging at least one fare before heading home to my own bed. But I didn't pick up anybody from the bar. 3 guys stumbled out of the shadows near the side of the building and started walking toward my car with this strange urgency that should have been my very first red flag. 2 of them were basically carrying the 3rd guy between them and holding him up by his armpits while his boots dragged lazily across the pavement. Like he couldn't even use his legs. I figured the guy was just super hammered. The guy on the left yanked my back door open, and they practically poured the limp guy into the middle of the back seat before squeezing in tight on either side of him. The smell hit my nostrils the second the door opened, and it was kind of a mix of cheap whiskey, sweat, and this weird metallic copper odor that I couldn't quite place. The guy on the right slammed his door shut and leaned forward until I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead in my rearview mirror, and he told me in this rushed voice that their buddy was just completely wasted and they needed to get him home right away. I looked back at all 3 of them in the mirror, and I noticed the guy in the middle had his chin pressed hard against his chest, completely unresponsive. So I turned around in my seat to give them my standard lecture about the steep cleaning fees if anyone messed up my car. I told him straight out, if your buddy throws up in my back seat, it's going to cost you a couple $100 minimum. But the 2 guys nodded, and that's when I noticed their eyes were darting everywhere except at me. They told me they'd like to just get moving, and they would cover whatever the ride cost. The destination on the app took us into a really shitty abandoned part of downtown Detroit that I normally avoided like the plague, especially at 2 a.m. But as I drove through the unlit streets, the silence in the car became thick, and it felt like it was crushing the air right out of my lungs. Every time I looked back in my rear view, the 2 guys on the outside were just looking out the windows, completely silent, while the guy in the middle just swayed limply with every turn, with his breathing sounded wet and ragged. I figured maybe he had a cold and being drunk wasn't helping anything. I was going down the road that was lined with boarded-up warehouses and shattered streetlights when I saw a bright red traffic light looming ahead. I came to a smooth stop, remembering the guy behind me was drunk. But before the car could even really stop, the 2 doors on the sides flew open at the same time. Before I could even open my mouth to ask what the hell was going on, the 2 guys bolted out of the back seat and ran in opposite directions. They just vanished into the darkness of the night. A wave of panic rushed over me as I sat there in the idling car, the cold night rushing in through the open rear doors. Something felt very, very off. I put my car in park, unbuckled my seatbelt, and turned all the way around in my seat to look at the guy in the middle who was now slumped heavily against the fabric of the middle seat. In the overhead light, I could see a massive stain saturating the entire front of his sweatshirt, spreading outward from his stomach like a horrible blooming flower. I know, that's the best way I could describe it. It kind of looked like a Rorschach test, to be honest with you. I reached back and touched his shoulder and shook him a little bit and called out to him, "Hey, buddy, are you okay?" But his body just slid sideways until his head hit off the doorframe really hard, which revealed his face, and even in the dim light of my dome light, I could see he was pale as a ghost. My eyes went to his hands, which were feebly clutching his abdomen, and that's when I saw the thick blood oozing between his fingers and pooling onto my floor mat. Reality hit me like a slap in the face, and I realized right then, this guy hadn't passed out from drinking. He'd been shot in the gut, and these two guys who had just put him in my car were using me as some kind of ambulance. Why they decided to abandon him to die in the back of my car? Well, your guess is as good as mine. I realized there was some blood on my hands, and I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I was trying to explain what was going on to the dispatcher, and she told me to stay exactly where I was and that EMS was on the way. But it took like 15 minutes. I mean, it was agonizingly slow. I was trapped in pitch black, in a dangerous neighborhood, in a stationary car, with a guy who was quite frankly dying in my back seat. For that 15 minutes, my eyes were scanning everywhere that I could look. My mirrors, to the left, to the right, behind me, forward. I was convinced those guys were going to come back and do something to me. To be honest, I wanted so badly to just push this guy out of the car and hit the gas and drive away. But my side of human morality came out, and I couldn't just leave this guy here. So I just sat in my car, praying for the sound of sirens. When the police cruisers and the ambulance finally came up to me with their red and blue lights flashing, I was overwhelmed with relief. Paramedics swarmed the back seat and immediately cut away the guy's clothes and shouted all this medical jargon while they loaded his pale body onto a stretcher, and I guess rushed him to a trauma unit nearby. This detective, meanwhile, had asked me to get out of the car and started asking me all these questions and took a statement from me. I explained him every grim detail of what I had seen. He told me the victim was in critical condition and nearly dead from a massive gunshot wound to the gut, and that his two so-called buddies had likely realized he wasn't going to make it and decided to dump him in an anonymous Uber, so they wouldn't get caught with a corpse. At first, the detective was really gruff, but then he looked at me with kind of a pity expression on his face and said the guys probably figured the victim would be dead by the time that I noticed, which then I thought, boy, I just turned my car into a rolling coffin. Yay for me. The funny thing is, I did end up getting paid for the fare and the messy cleanup fee through the app a few days later. But the company called me shortly after to inform me that the entire ride had been booked using a stolen credit card associated with a string of other carjackings. Well, at the end of the day, that was the end of the line for me. And after spending the weekend scrubbing the literal iron smell of death out of my cloth seats, I deleted the app from my phone, and I promised myself I would never let a stranger into my car for another ride ever again. To all my brothers and sisters who are still doing ride sharing, God bless you. You're doing great work. I just don't have the stomach for it anymore. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give the video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. It's all free and it all helps out with the algorithms, so I appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, and consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is also in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything: a ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.